Hello and welcome back to the Rogue Monkey podcast. We're all about diving into amazing stories, uncovering lessons and sharing wisdom to help you on your journey. This week we've got two very special guests lined up to join us. Dr. Amy Whitehead and Jen Coe come from the world of sports psychology and sports coaching respectively. However, collectively the dynamic duo have co-edited a number of books, including most recently The Myths of Sports Performance, which is the topic of today's conversation. Jen has been on the show previously, exploring her journey all the way back in episode 28, and her life has moved on a lot since then. We start with an overview of both our guests and then dive straight into some of the most poignant topics addressed in their most recent book. It's a conversation I thoroughly enjoyed and I hope you take as much away from it as I did recording it. The links to both guests and their incredible books are shared in the show notes. So here we go, let's get into it and our latest episode of the Rogue Monkey podcast. Jen, Amy, welcome to the Rogue Monkey podcast. How are we both doing?
Very good, thanks.
Well, Jen's a veteran of the Rogue Monkey family. So I'll let Amy introduce herself first and then we'll come across.
Thanks, Kevin. My name's Amy Whitehead. I work at Liverpool John Moores University as an associate professor in sports psychology and coaching. I also work as a sport and exercise psychologist, and as we'll go into today, Jen and I have edited a couple of books, Myths of Sport Coaching, Myths of Sport Performance. We've got Myths of Sport Psychology in the works, and Women Working in Sport, which will be released next year. So there we go.
Not much going on at all, and I'm sure we'll dive into a lot of those threads. But for anyone who's not caught Jen's episode yet, which we will link in the notes, do you want to give us a bit of an insight into Jen?
Yeah, sure. I think the last time we spoke, I was working at West Ham, maybe in professional women's football. So I've moved to we've now since September broken away from the FA, and it's Women's Professional League. So that'll change soon, but that's the holding name for it. So it covers the top tier of women's professional football in this country and the second tier across 23 clubs. And the role I have is performance wellbeing lead. So I do support the development of sports psychology in the team that I'm in. But there's a real interesting movement towards well-being, prioritizing that, and it's linked to performance that the clubs are really buying into. So that's a shift. And then recently become a mom. Books are coming out. Yeah, a whole host of I'm really looking forward to going home for the Christmas period, because although people say they're winding down, I felt like I was winding up into December and getting more projects and telling myself I needed to finish things by a certain date. So 2024 has been a really interesting year, and I'm glad to be back on the pod, and I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation.
Yeah, no doubt we will. And I can tell you've been busy because we've not had any of those message exchanges that start with, I've got an idea, have you got 5 minutes?
The Jenny mini podcast, yeah.
One thing, again, for our listeners and viewers, also to flag, you've both got experiences as athletes in the world of sport. And I think there's another lens to that. And, you look at all the science, but all of just the anecdotal stuff around the way that being an athlete itself gives you another angle, another insight. And obviously some of the stuff we'll discuss today will tap into that. But I guess let's go half a step back. Why a number of books, but why this topic? What was the motivation? And take us from where this concept first flagged up to it rolling off the printing press. Don't know who wants to go first. I'll let you decide that between you.
Do you want to go, Jen?
I can start, yeah. So it seemed like it was an obvious next step. Maybe in our head said, oh, will there be a part 2? And then we did a webinar series for 18 months, which the authors of Myths of Sports Coaching contributed their time to talk about the chapter and some progressions that have happened in the research and their own interests since the book had been released. And in those conversations, we heard great stories about how useful and how impactful the Myths of Sports Coaching book was. But we had some nudges around, you forgot about this myth. What about this myth? I'm here. So we're like, okay, make a note. And then the wider piece of sports performance meant that we could look across the disciplines beyond coaching, although you could argue that each practitioner has an element of coaching within it. It was looking at topics that are maybe a little bit nuanced, maybe broader, and need a multidisciplinary approach. So we started to look at the topics that people were suggesting, ones that we knew we couldn't fit into the first book because we didn't want people carrying a big chunky thing around with them. And the factors that were at the core of the first book, like accessibility from a number of different angles, global reach and perspective. So there's 40 contributors, or 40 plus 42 maybe, across 11 countries in this book, which we are really proud of. And that kind of diversity and beyond with gender as well gives us and the reader a chance to relate possibly to some of the topics, or contextualize things a little bit easier. And that was the starting point for it. There has definitely been a number of different conversations Amy and I have had with the nature of it going broader. How broad do we go? How deep? How academic? The different disciplines have their own interests and way of disseminating literature. So we wanted to be able to relate to them, but equally we wanted to go back to that accessible, where we wanted to be digestible and to almost hit the ground running with the chapter when they read it, go, okay. And similar again to the first book, a vehicle for conversation with people. So that's the kind of messy randomness of us piecing this together. But we did know with the, I can say, success of the first book that there was going to be a part two of things, and things are evolving, aren't they, in the world of sport anyway? So we want to stay at the forefront of that.
Yeah, we want to connect the research with the people that it's intended for. We always talk about this. We publish research. It goes into a journal online. It's not accessible to like most people. Like if it's expensive. So we wanted to, invite these really good practitioners, researchers in and create like a one-stop shop to some of the myths that exist in the world that Jen and I come across in our work. I discuss with my students. Jen is constantly discussing with coaches on the ground, and not just coaches now. Like Jen's part of a whole network, a whole MDT, and the role that she works in. I teach on a master's degree that looks at physiology, biomechanics, nutrition, psychology. So there's this whole kind of plethora of myths across the whole sport science board, and I think that's what we've tried to create with the Meta Sport Performance. It's more than coaching. So the first book was successful, but I was getting comments from like physiotherapists and different sports scientists saying how useful it was for them, and they wouldn't necessarily call themselves a coach. So I think that's why we wanted to broaden the title around Meta Sport Performance to make it instantly more accessible to more people.
And I think that accessibility piece, and also the language piece of having such a diverse group of contributors in the way that they write, but from different parts of the world in different sports with different experiences. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges, is that you can have books, and I can only speak from my own experience, that have got an incredible reputation, but I might be a couple of pages in and I'm struggling because I don't quite relate to the way that they're articulating that. Whereas in this book, with that many people, there is going to be somebody in there that within a few chapters, I'm like, yes, this is exactly my world. And that might be, and that having that kind of format of a book where you have so many different contributors that people can dip in and dip out and go, I'm interested in that topic and this theme and that person, instead of here's a 300-page novel, and if it's not for you on page one, well, sorry, it's the same person for the next 300 pages.
Yeah.
And just, I guess, on that, how hard is it to manage that many different people in terms of their contributions, whilst also keeping, I guess, the golden thread that's trying to pull the whole book together? Jen, I don't know if you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. I want to say it was really difficult, and make our job sound really hard. But when you get people who are really passionate, and we had a little bit of a blueprint template from the first book on what worked well and the reflections we had from that. So engaging somebody around a topic, having a really rich conversation, them saying, I've got some people I want to take on board. Like you talk about winning matters most. You have a chat with Elliot about doing a chapter. Elliot's like, yeah, but I might ask Kath. You're like, okay, super, Kath Bishop, yeah, and and my other sports psych friend Katie Mobin, I'm like, oh, fabulous, and then Lawrence from the TAP program, yeah, okay, great, wow. There's four people with an incredible amount of experience contributing to a chapter on a really lived topic with great kind of richness in it. So I feel like it's a privileged position to maybe shape it slightly and say, this is our why in the book. Do you align? And can you see, the ask of maybe some practical examples at the end? And that's the only real constraint. Here's some, figures on the amount of numbers and a timeline, or words and a timeline. Um, and that's where we're at. And then the editing piece is the reading, the positioning of the chapters, the kind of fluidity or a seamless transition we were looking for. And then if there's some reflective questions throughout that might disrupt, great. So yeah, it was a privilege to be part of the journey. It's a lot of work in the time it takes to get all the people on board, check in, meet deadlines, work with the publishers, work together in our schedule. But when you have a driver and you've got passionate people, it's like this whole phrase, when you do a job you love, you never feel like you're working a day in your life. That kind of feel was about the book.
And then,
Yeah,
Amy, I guess from your point of view, with the academic hat on and what you talked about there of the challenges of accessing it, both physically accessing it, but also you're trying to condense, in some cases, 20, 30, 40-page journals and the knowledge contained in that down to a single chapter. And yet it's still got to have that richness and the academics like grounding. So it still
yeah.
stands up of the statements that are being made. So how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I think one of the problems I see in research and academia is that sometimes a research paper will be so narrow in its focus in terms of what it might be testing, if we're looking at like physiology, for example. But that tiny little, you'll know from like, training physiology of swimming, for example, we might look at one tiny marker, but actually we need to consider that marker in the grand scheme of how it fits in with that specific session, with that day of the week, with that individual athlete. So I like going back to what Jen was saying, we've been super lucky, or I guess really selective in that the people we invite, and that we know that they can collate all of their information and try and tell us a story of what the research is telling us, but how that translates into practice. And that's, for me, that's like the biggest thing for the part of these books, is that a coach, for example, or a sports scientist can pick up this book and think, how does this apply to me and my practice? And that's what we were really quite passionate about. You just said there, Kevin, I pick up a book by a really, renowned person, but after 3 pages, I've got a headache, or I'm struggling, or I still have to do this. I have to Google what some other words mean. If I'm having to Google what the word means, it's too much, like for me, too much effort and energy, and it's not meeting me halfway either. It's not accessible.
I mean, if you have to Google a word, I'm never reading a book. That's just the honest truth of that.
So I mean, some chapters, I think we're not apologizing for it, because some chapters are a little bit heavier than others. But what we've tried to do, and you've alluded to already, is ask the authors to bring themselves to life in these chapters as well. So some of them are just like the winning matters most. You've got some really experienced practitioners writing a chapter about their experiences of working in high performance sport. So, and then you've got, Andy Bradshaw's chapter as working as a coach developer, and he brings a lot of his experience into that. So I guess that's, for me, it's bridging. Every chapter has some underpinning research and evidence and academic support, which is, again, we're really passionate about evidence and underpinning. But depending on which philosophical kind of position you come from, research is meaningless, and the individual experience is the most important thing. Or if you're a hard scientist, without the evidence, it means nothing. So we've tried to get a bit of a happy medium between the two.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I've been having a conversations about integration of tech recently, and
Mm-hmm.
the tech for contactless cards has been around for a very long time, but the interface that allowed on stream the masses to access it, for it to fit into a bank card, for it to be added to a phone, as soon as that clicked, suddenly it opened up all of the possibilities of what contactless is now used for. and it's that interface, and that's the gift of being the editors and pulling that group of people together. And you've mentioned a few chapters that I actually want to dive into, but let's start with that Winning Matters one. And I think we had Cass on the pod quite a few seasons ago, and Lawrence and Elliot and Katie in their respective fields, as you say, they're hugely experienced, and they've all got their different experiences. So, 4 people trying to distill that topic down and, like you say, bringing themselves to it, but also finding that ground to say, right, here's the takeaway from this myth. So I don't know, Jen, if we want to start with,
Yeah, sure.
that chapter and what you took from it, but also explaining, I guess, let's go a layer above in layman's terms, what that means to a listener going, well, what does that actually mean, winning matters most?
Before I do that, I just want to share with you, and this may be common knowledge. I watched a program the other night where somebody's taken the chip from the credit card and put it under their skin so they can just swipe it with their hand and it pays. I was like, oh God, I'm really behind the times now because I was doing and eyeing at the TV. So it was, that was interesting. But I see it. No, I won't go down that road. No, I won't. Tech fascinates me and how quickly it moves on, and I'm intrigued by it, but terrified it's at the same time. So the Winning Matters Most chapter, I think this was one that we knew we wanted. It probably needed some consideration because of the practicality or the practical experiences that were about to be shared, the nature and in the environments and contexts that these brilliant authors were working. We know that some of the governing bodies and some organizations have added, winning well into a strand of a strategy or way of working. But actually, has it materialized to be productive or impactful? Are they adhering to it? All of this. And over the course of the last 10 years, I've seen that in the different roles I've been in. I've seen the tokenistic well-being piece, or the one-day course someone goes on and therefore, they're better at coach-athlete relationships. So there's living and breathing stuff. And that I think this chapter allows us to really pause and think of that mentality. In the last book, there was a number of chapters that talked about burnout and working 24/7, and a number of different things there. So there still is a strand coming over to think of. One of the sub chapters in this, or subheadings, is winning isn't always something to celebrate. Now, we could all probably think here of examples. Michael, the Scottish swimmer, Kevin Michael
Jameson.
That's it. Does a great TED talk, and he talks about in his TED talk the medal smashing as a glass medal, and he gives it to.
I'm gonna link that in the notes.
Wicked.
Because...
So I listened to that years ago, played it when I was at West Ham. We had a really rich conversation about not saying that if we're not thinking about winning, that we're not being professional or we're not high performing athletes, but there's something about that being the only piece, the only success measure. So there's something about the celebration part in this, in that section, that was really interesting. And I think it was Katie as well, and it might have been post London or Rio, produced an infograph, and it was the measure of success, and there was 2 pie charts, if you like, and one was like winning, losing, and the other was the role model, the overcoming adversity, like 5 or 6 different things, which I have used a number of times. So we knew there was going to be richness in the chapter, but it also highlights different people who've shared their story, which I have had the fortune and kind of sadness of relating to Olympians who feel like they haven't done well or haven't achieved a lot, even though they've gone to an Olympic Games, or they've come fourth and didn't medal. And but they do talk and reference, other things, like one quote that's in here, which I won't name because I'll spoil it, but the hours we do, the pain, it's all worth it in the end. So the damage that this mentality of winning matters most. The cost of winning is mentioned in there as well, which, we all know from a commitment point of view, the kind of selfish, which is a hard process word for some athletes, the selfish behavior that's needed to bring your goals and your drive for such a prolonged period of time to the forefront and bring a team of people, whatever sport you're in, on that journey with you. So what's kind of falling by the wayside? How many times are you saying no to certain people? Relationships coming and going, and we know how important that support structure is. So what happens when you move on, not just from an identity perspective, but you look around the room and you don't have that many people around you because it was no's for such a long time. And that's not even going into the monetary piece of it. So I'll pause on that because Amy might want to contribute to it, but there's just such richness in that, in the examples, in the refresh of, hey, you don't need to be this way. It doesn't need to be that way. And I mean, I'm coming from someone who's worked in professional football, where that is something I had to remind people of. We do not need to work every single day, and you don't need to be visible on site every single day to maximize your own potential and the potential of others.
Yeah, and I think for me, leading on from that, Jen, the main thing I took from the book was this kind of when in deep and when in shallow, which links to what you're saying there. So I think they provide a nice little like model of when in deep. So it's kind of, I ask the question to athletes all the time, like, what's your why? Like, why are you doing this sport? And they might flippantly say for the medals. So if it's just for the medals, then that's potentially winning shallow. Because going back to what Jen's saying, like what does that give us, like ultimately, and if that's how we value ourselves and our worth, but we only ever achieve that one medal, then are we not enough for the rest of our lives? So they talk about winning deep being about, social impact. Is our engagement in this activity having social impact? Is it about developing connections with others? Is it about this constant learning and developing as a person? So if we can encourage, like with our athletes, this winning deep mentality, then there's more likely to be a persistent, prolonged career within the sport, and hopefully more healthier, mentally healthier athletes as well. So yeah, I think for me and it goes back to the conversation we were having before the pod around, why do we do the sports that we do? Because I'm not a professional athlete, I'm always winning deep because I have to look at why am I doing an activity? Well, I'm doing it for the social connection. I'm doing it to meet new people, for the thrill of going fast down a hill, for example, because I'm not going to win and I'm not going to get medals. But that's not why I'm doing it. So if I want to be successful as a athlete who's got longevity in a sport, then I need to think about the winning deep elements.
I love that, winning deep, and I think there's so many layers to that, and I think you saw it at the Olympic Games this last summer in terms of the athletes that did and didn't get medals, did and didn't win, qualified or overcame injury, or whatever it was. And that runs in stark contrast to a conversation I had recently with somebody. I won't say what sport it was in, but it was in the kind of an academy system that was developing athletes. And they asked the athletes, what is it you're looking for out of this journey? And it was like a young teenager, and the response was fame and money. And I was like, I was, it's a bit flippant, and I thought, there's going to be more to this. So like, no, they were deadly serious. That's what they were looking for out of this journey, and they weren't even old enough to earn money. And it's, I think, we're in a new age now, even through the world of research, think how long it takes from actually a piece being put together, approved, investigated, and then kind of published. The world is changing so quickly, and we've got a crop of kids that are seeing instantaneous success, and sport just doesn't work like that. And sometimes it's not fair. We all saw what happened last summer with Adam Peaty, waking up with COVID on the morning of the Olympic final. Tough. That's sport. It's not, we don't like it and we're not happy about it, but that's sometimes the way that the cards are given to you. So I think that's a really interesting piece. And I guess it links into the next chapter that I want to dive into in terms of the sports that are trying to change the narrative a little bit and actually evolve. And I know it's different sport to sport because of the imbalances from a gender point of view, but I want to talk about the smoke and mirrors chapter because that's an area that I'm very curious about, because my sport of swimming has gender parity, but equally it's also very topical because I saw a sport, and again, I won't name and shame them yet, but I watched them publish a thing about prize money this week with equal attendance to the event, but the prize money was astronomically different between the men's and the women's events. And I was, how are you promoting a collaborative an event that showcases men's and women's sport, and yet you're also showcasing the fact that there's an imbalance between the two? That blows my mind in the time that we're in. So Jen, from
Yeah.
your point of view, obviously working in a sport that has broken away and is effectively building from the ground up from where it was, say, even 10 years ago, What's been your take from that chapter, and I guess in your experience, what that looks like on the ground?
I feel I'm in a really fortunate position to be in women's professional football at the moment. The ground is moving from underneath this. There's incredible stuff happening. There's a surge forward to um, enjoy the experience, make it different to men's football. We've released a load of work around female athlete health that says, get your level of knowledge and professionalism to the level it needs to be for the audience you're working with. Come on the journey. Or it's a must and it's licensed and mandated. But there's a realistic piece that needs to be processed here, that although we see big numbers and bums and seats in some amazing games, 2 weeks ago we had all games across 23 clubs played in a stadium. Absolutely fantastic. It doesn't mean that if 40,000 are over in the Emirates, that 40,000 are at one of the other venues. The numbers are varied, but there are more people going to the games. The fan experience is different. The enjoyment of the sport, the behavior and the ethical boundaries and the guidance on acceptable kind of behavior, the development of pedagogy and coaching, it's all moving in a really positive direction. Do we think that that's representative across all sports, across all tiers, across all clubs in the professional game? No. So there's still loads of work to do. And so when we spoke to Alex, I think the question lasted 10 seconds. The conversation lasted about 2 hours afterwards. And what about this? And have you noticed this? And when we started having conversations with her about the chapter, she's Australian, living in Australia, and the World Cup was there. So she had a different kind of angle and perspective. She works in cricket, so she's included multi-sport in the chapter. So there was a bit on, yes, we have work done, we're doing some work, but there is so much more to do. So we're acknowledging the greatness of this, that, and the other thing. We need to leave the ladder down. We're not saying, as Amy and I have had conversations on before, here now, you got your bums on seats, are you grand now? You got your little World Cup and you got your few extra pound in your prize money. Are we all happy? No, we're not. No, we're not at all. So there's a piece in here about kind of professionalization. There's loads of different stats about equity, and we know that there are some great sports that, from a participation point of view, as you pointed out, some of these considerations that exist in other sports don't even have to be considered. We know that some sports, from a prize money, like golf and tennis, there's still issues, but they're earning more money as female athletes in the sport than they may be in other sports. So it's looking at different key tournaments, different moments in the sporting history that have influenced change, and how we don't want to kind of get complacent and press pause and pump the brakes, because there's way much more to be done, and how sometimes the media can skew that a little bit. So that's the kind of loose snapshot of a great piece of work gone into a chapter.
Yeah. This is slightly separate, but it makes me think about the way women didn't have the same opportunities from a work perspective. So we could see now that women in the workplace, we're not quite there yet, but we have way more opportunities, and there's more doors are open. So we're saying women go and work, but then we're not providing women with the same culture. We're still expecting societal norms. We're still expecting women to then still do all the other stuff that they were expected to do. I'm massively generalizing, and I'm not saying everyone thinks that way, but it's still, women have still got societal pressures to, raise their children. I was just thinking about maternity leave. I don't know that many organisations that say, well, the man can take the full maternity leave. There's some, because or the man or the other partner. Sorry, Jen. There's some, and things are changing, but we're not there yet. And I think that's the whole point of this chapter.
I think it is a really interesting piece, and I think I guess I've seen it more from my experiences again in football, where I've sat down maybe 10 years ago with I want to say they were probably 13 or 14. They were a little cousin of one of my closest mates, and they were at an event, and they said, "Oh, meet my cousin." I want to say it was Arsenal, but whoever he was playing for, it was a professional football team. and he was earning more than me, and he was a kid, and I was like, it's not my world, obviously, and I was like, okay. Yesterday I sat down with, I don't want to get the age group wrong, but she's on the Lioness's pathway as a high performance athlete. She goes away to a lot of camps, does a lot of the travel around the world and the events. And I'm having a conversation with her, and I'm like, your world could not be any more different to the experience I've had with a young man going on that same pathway, representing the same country, doing the same sport. And that and yes, like you said, we have made massive leaps forward, and I don't think in every sport we are moving in the right direction. But that doesn't mean just because we've taken step 2 of 100 that we should go, great job, everyone, well done. Let's
Yeah.
just take 10 years off now. And I think that's a really challenging piece. And I know you touched there on the maternity leave side of things, and that's obviously again another area where you're seeing a lot more, maybe through the increased media exposure of it, but female athletes saying, I'm going to have a baby and then I'm going to come back. And people going, can't do that. That's not how things have been done. And I think that chapter, again, it stuck out to me as something that's extremely topical, but something that you say, it's not just a societal norm, a sporting societal norm,
Yeah.
something that traditionally just didn't happen. And, the documentary a few years back on Helen Glover when she was going for Tokyo, called The Mother of All Comebacks, the fact that there was a documentary about the fact it's so rare, you're like, this kind of highlights the problem, So I don't know if you want to lead us off, Amy, in terms of your take on both that chapter, but also from a research point of view, how that space is evolving, because it was unbelievably unique even 5-10 years ago, and now it's becoming, I want to say, more normal. Definitely not the done thing though.
Yeah, absolutely. From a research perspective, it's a really exciting time because it's really starting to grow. About 3 or 4 years ago, I started working with Kelly Massey. She's an ex 400 meter Olympic relay bronze medalist. She came to work with us at Liverpool John Moores University, wanted to do research, and she has a lot of friends for professional athletes who were going through pregnancy. And at the time, there was no research really that looked into how people experience pregnancy as elite athletes, and what are their kind of thoughts, feelings, how does that change over time. And it I've been really fortunate that she's invited me into that world of that area of research. And I agree with what you're saying, and it links to a chapter in the first book which really educated me about the history of women in sport around. So why is it that we have these like stigmas or stereotypes of what women can and can't do? And Ali Bowes talks a lot about how the education system and fashion has very much dictated female involvement in activity, and this like medicalized opinion that women were incapable of doing physical activity. They were seen as feminine and weak, and basically just caregivers. So women were banned from certain activities, football. Who was it who got rugby tackled off the Boston Marathon? What's that famous story? Because women were seen as incapable of doing such things. So add pregnancy into that, where like I'm not even joking. Like I talk about my family a lot, and I feel bad because they'll never listen to these pods anyway. But I've had conversations with my dad about pregnant women running, and he's like, the fetus is just going to be banging all over the place. It's going to damage this baby. There's no evidence for that at all. And I think when you start to dig into, well, what is the evidence? So what is the evidence around engaging in physical activity and negative implications for the fetus? Yes, it's very individual, and yes, if women have medical issues, or there are individual issues, they need to consider that. I'm not saying every pregnant woman go out and run a marathon, because that's extremely irresponsible. I think the point is that the evidence is so lacking, and cultural norms are almost scaring women into, as soon as they get pregnant, stop. And that is quite detrimental to a lot of people who, especially as elite athletes, when it's their income, it's their who they are as a person, it's everything they know, to then scare people into saying you shouldn't be doing physical activity, you should be training, it's really damaging. But I feel like the rhetoric is changing because we've seen so many amazing stories of, professional athletes being even more successful post birth. Um, and for me, one of the keys for that. So if we look at some of the stories within our research, it's that social support from their national governing body, from their family, from their partners. So the women that have got that support tend to be the women that are most successful. It's not rocket science, but it's yeah, and I think you can hear and see a lot more now in the media where sponsors aren't dropping athletes when they get pregnant. I'll let Jen talk about the things that they've put on, from an FA and women's program perspective. And just to mention, so Margie Davenport and Mel Heyman, they're the experts in the physiology of kind of pregnancy with athletes and elite athletes, or just general physical activity. I I I have to kind of be careful what I say because I'm not an expert in that area and I don't want to start recommending for physiological recommendations. But I guess that's kind of my take on that area. Jen, I don't know if you want to touch on
Yeah, a few
some of the
things.
work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was thinking as you were speaking about Alison Felix from the
Yeah.
crash perspective and those kind of movements, and there's something about whatever we can contribute in these chapters and get the conversation going, and whether it's education, signposting, or just evidence underpinning what people are doing and thinking, that consistency over time will lead to people feeling supported and feeling the courage to make confident moves and ask of organizations or partnerships. Like, I don't think an 11-time Olympic medalist needed too much courage and support, but there was definitely resistance met, and then great things happened. And would you think great things happened? I'm saying that, and I'm like, she got a crash at the Olympics, a plethora of other brilliant things, but like you'd think that would be the norm. You would think these kind of things exist in clubs, organizations. So that was one thing. And as you were speaking as well, Amy, I was holding back the kind of building or bubbling frustration in that, we need to be more evidence informed. I appreciate there's a place for lived experience and it's absolutely invaluable, but the asking of the why we're doing this, with how quickly society is changing and moving, and yeah, like even the examples you were given there, Kevin, like these young people who are earning money in a different way. They're dealing with life situations definitely in a vastly different way to the way I grew up. I was watching a show the other night on TV from a school that have banned mobile phones for 21 days. So the students and the staff. The students were talking about how they might get 1,000 messages or 3,000 messages, and how they, all that we know that, mobiles and social media evokes inside people and young people particularly. It's just massively grown in the level of impact that's having. So I'm sidetracking slightly, but it's just about looping all this in, that some of these norms like that Amy's talking about that existed are just wow, how did people believe them? Why did no one challenge them? And then they did eventually, and we moved on. So there's just something that I suppose from a work perspective, we have listened to the staff, the players. We've done loads of work with various organizations, one being the Well HQ, to produce incredible amount of guidance and education for staff to say these are the people you're working with now. So even if you've worked at the highest level in other sports or at men's sport, you're working with women at the prime. They don't want, and we don't want them to not feel like they can live a normal life and think about having children in a safe space and have that open conversation, and then return and to have the highest level of care on and off the pitch, and expectation, and not feel like, oh, my contract is dwindling, my money over my head is getting lower, I'll miss out on international opportunities because I'm not on the pitch at my club. So we're seeing a massive movement for clubs, growing numbers in players having children returning, feeling comfortable and supported with their partners to be part of that process, that multidisciplinary approach to plans. So we've released guidance documents that are a really robust piece of work, and lots of time and lots of different experts contributing into it for the practitioners to say, or for the practitioners to read, to understand, for the clubs to make their own policies from this as well. So it's just a big meaty document, but it's airtight. Now, everything and situations will evolve, but for now, we've tried to cover everything, both the players and staff, and societal norms as well, and requests. So yeah, really delighted with that piece of work. It's obviously not me, it's the wider team. So it's just, it's nice to be part of an organisation that's thinking of supporting that way. And I've had more organic conversations with clubs on the ground, asking questions about breastfeeding and rooms and facilities and kit, and people coming on site, and the regularity, like, what might this look like? How do I behave? What can I say and not say? And in this kind of early stages ish of this happening, or more comfortable stage, this next stage, you want to just lean into that instead of going, how do you not know? And this is great. You're leaning in and going, okay, they're asking a question, they're interested. What have we not provided? What is in place? And yeah, involving a wider team than just it falling on one person's head, or the athlete or player feeling like they can't ask those questions. So yeah, really great piece of work there, but good to see players bringing their kids on the pitch, and returning, even stuff online that you see with videos. They're 5 months back after having a child in the gym, talking about how they feel, how well they feel supported. It's not staged, it's representative of that club and maybe the wider organisation, and how well we're doing at that.
If I could just add to that as well, again, Jen, just linking from what you're saying, social support is and I've said it already, is the biggest thing we've found in the research. So one of the papers that we've published was so Jen's talking about like a team sport, and I feel like in a team sport you've got people around, you've got a group of staff as well, and some of the stories we've got from like individual sports, so track and field athletes, where there's one example where someone did bring their child to the track, and a member of staff picked up that child and removed the child from the track and said, "Will, we need to move this child. We'll stick it in the office. Someone will watch it." So you can imagine that, you don't know these people, you don't know who's looking after your child, and the fact that they're not welcome in that environment. I do think times have changed since we collected that data, but if that support isn't there, then like the child is that person's priority. They can't just leave them on, unsupervised. So I think national governing bodies or organisations creating that support is very necessary, because unless they have a really supportive family, or we've seen examples where you've got two athletes that are both competing in their prospective sports, and their parents, like, that's really difficult. Some of the most successful examples I've seen is where the partner becomes the sole, the main carer for the child, and allows that freedom for the athlete to pursue their training. But if you don't have that, then it becomes very difficult.
Yeah, and I guess that underpins, the purpose of the book in the first place is to kind of break some of these myths, and just as you said from the first book, educate people on the history. And I speak to a lot of different people in sport and present a lot, and talking to people who maybe it's just ignorance, maybe it's a poor role that the education of whether it's coaches or parents or whoever it is has actually played in the first place. And I had people talk to me about, for example, women's salary rights in football and other sports abroad. And I say, you do understand that in 2014, there were golf courses in the UK that it was illegal for women to play. And it was 2012 when the FA got its first female member of staff on the board. That was in my working lifetime. And it's ultimately sport reflects society, and it will never kick on if society's not kicking on. But as society kicks on, there has to be that transfer. Instead of going, oh, well, that's going on over there, but sport's 20 years behind. It's like, no, sport is a part of society. It's not a hangover from it. And I think sometimes it feels like, yeah, we've got crashes in other aspects of life, but as a professional sports person, no, that's not an option. And you think, and I say this a lot to people when they're talking about support for coaches. I say if you actually look at what a coach does and understand that in any other profession, 95% of what they do, there is a law or a piece of legislation that bans that practice. And yet we go, yeah, but it's sport. That's okay. And I think, I don't know if, again, that's this narrative of sport coming from an amateur space and it's moving to a professionalized space. But even in the more professional sports, there still seems to be some of these antiquated norms that are just hangovers from society. And I think, talking about that kind of space of developing and moving forwards, there is a big education piece around there for people to understand the history of where we've come from, whatever thread, whatever myth it is we're looking at, where we are, but also the opportunities moving forwards. And I think, a big part of my role certainly is working with coaches. And, you both mentioned Andy's chapter, which, does very nicely pull the whole book together. So I don't know if you're both happy to explore that a little bit. Jen, I know you
Yeah.
spent a lot of time in the coach development space, so I'm sure you thoroughly enjoyed watching that chapter come together.
Yeah, sure. I can share some stuff. I'll give, just so people who are listening can maybe frame the chapter of whether coach development or the development of coaching or mentoring, or teaching or tutoring or instructing is floating around in their head. So from a SIMSPA perspective, Andy highlights this nice and early on from a professional standard perspective. Um, the coach developer's work is educational, developmental, caring and support orientated. Interventions may include the development of technical skills, enhancing interpersonal relationships, evolving effective strategies to manage specific challenges and constraints, or a combination of these. And I think that scope or that span there just shows you the depth and breadth of the role of a coach developer. The way I've worked over the years is definitely relational. So it's underpinning everything I do, create the trust and the connection and the value in that I see you and I hear you and I'm here to then build on whatever may come after that, because I've worked in sports that I've never even held the equipment of before I go in the door. Obviously do my homework and I know the nuances of it, but we thought it was really important to have this chapter because it's for the title of the chapter alone is probably the interesting representation of what coaches are going through. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. There are a lot of coaches going alone. For one reason or another. There are a lot of organizations who don't speak to their coaches and don't know who these coaches really are as people. They might put them on a program. They might see them as a competition. At a competition, they might give them a new title and they go up the ranks, but do they really know who they are and what their developmental needs are? But the great pieces that Andy talks about in the kind of subheadings are, and I've witnessed this myself, is that there's a perception that if you're put on a program or you're highlighted to get some coach development support from an organization, there's an immediate thought, if they don't have clarity on what this person does and what the role is, that am I not good enough? Is that why I was selected? I need developing. Um, if they've come from certain sports or they have not had exposure to a coach developer before, and maybe they've had it from an instructor or a mentor who's been very in there and how they operate, there might be a perception that, are they going to come in and tell me how to do my job? So there's a bit of resistance, and I've definitely experienced that from a gendered lens, from an age perspective. So you don't have grey hair, and you're a woman. So what can you offer me? Yeah. I don't know if that person's coaching anymore. So there's a few pieces in here that I think is really valuable to cover different experiences, different quotes from people who Andy has worked with. Andy's been part of. He's in UK sport now, previously in UK coaching, organising incredible programs, CPD, and supporting the development with SIMSPA of professional standards, and designing various other kind of more formal qualifications. So there's a reflective piece in the role that the coach developer plays that is a thread the whole way through this book of, why am I doing what I do? Why do I see and think and feel these things that I'm experiencing? And from a learning perspective, and a pedagogical angle, you can easily pick up TikTok and Instagram and get a whole plethora of ways of doing something, which is brilliant for maybe creativity and diversity of thought. But the solid foundation of understanding why you do something is important before they start taking in all of these and going, okay, grab all of these. So, yeah, that's it. Andy's chapter explores all the different, the whys of being on your own as a coach, the journey you're on, having a coach developer, how that might work. He puts in some questions that might emerge from certain conversations here, like how well did that new idea or strategy work in practice? So it's again just dropping things in, finding environments to have great, rich conversations, whether it's miking a coach up, it's going to their environment, it's bringing them to other environments. That's really about the learning experience and the cross pollination, but the reflective piece of somebody going on a journey with you. And I always say, any coach development experience I've had has been a privilege, a real, like, I'm a postage stamp size person in the massive, big envelope of their journey. And so, yeah. So, and I think there's varying opinions out there, people working in vastly different ways with different agendas. So this is a nice, a nice chapter to kind of put some of those to rest, challenge some ways of thinking, and give some clarity from a professional standards perspective.
What about from your perspective, Amy? Obviously looking at it again through that research lens, but also having had those different experiences career-wise.
Yeah, I think the term coach developer is quite I don't want to say confusing term, but I think it's used in different ways by different people. We it's contested a lot within coach education literature. So, for example, you have people use the word coach developer, you have coach educator, you have mentor, and you see different sports kind of using different titles. For me, I just think as long as if it's anyone who helps a coach develop, um, but I think if we want to really look at the like getting the most out of that development, I see a coach developer as a critical friend. But I think Jen mentioned this around sometimes some coaches think, okay, you're my developer, develop me then, give me information. And I think as a domain, we need to promote a coach developer as someone who's there to support, to collaborate with, and to like I said, to as a critical friend rather than like this fountain of knowledge. I think I was working with in a kind of coach development environment with a specific NGB where they're really interested in bringing people in as coach developers from different sports so that they could cross pollination of new ideas, and that landed really well with some people. But then other people were like, well, you don't know my area, what can you teach me? So I do think I don't want to say an education because that's just individual experience, but I think there's if we can promote just a coach developer as being a supportive collaborator rather than but I think that's a problem with society. Like I also think about my own students, and I stand up in front of a room as a lecturer, and they expect me to just vomit information onto them. And it takes time for us to kind of get through to the students that we're not here just to give you information. We're here to challenge, and we're here to develop you as a critical thinker. And for that to happen, we need to have it's a two-way dialogue and conversation, and I need to know what your experiences are in the world, and I need to understand where you're coming from. And to do that, I can't just spew information at you and tell you how knowledgeable I am.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, there's Cody Royal, his second book. He works as a coach developer in North America, and I was fortunate enough to have a couple of conversations and contribute to the book that he wrote, which was Second Set of Eyes, which I think is a nice way of framing some of the work coach developers do. And I think there's throughout the chapter with the how, the why, the what, all of that Andy covers, there is as Amy was alluding to there, like meeting people where they're at and working with what they've got, like different concepts that you can take into those conversations that allow you kind of maybe challenge you to reflect on how you're arriving in those moments. And there is definitely a level of professionalism and awareness that's needed, an emotional quotient in this role that puts the ego to the side and not kind of takes over and imparts all of your knowledge, and hanging out with somebody and being accepted into their environment, both from an athlete and a coach perspective, is a real great space to be in.
And that made me think of, so I did some work for the FA a couple of years ago when they had a big mentor program. So all the mentors got given all a nice kit, the big coats with the big FA badge on. And the group of mentors that I was working with in Liverpool, one of them said, I'm not going to wear my kit, because as soon as I wear my kit, then the coach that I'm working with feels under pressure, because they feel like somewhat it's like this impression management. Someone from the FA who's very important because they're wearing all this fancy kit is stood there watching me. So now I feel like there's a real power dynamic. I might coach in a non-natural way, more of a thinking things. So it sets up the relationship in a not a great way. So this person was like, I'm not even going to wear the kit, because I want to try and, power is always going to be there, but I want to try and balance the power a little bit so that our relationship can be more comfortable and the conversations that we can have can be more real. And I thought that was a really nice kind of example of meeting the person where they're at.
You know what's fascinating is 4 years ago, maybe even longer than that, when I first started putting the idea together for the podcast and the conversations, it was about sharing stories of those that are challenging things, trying to do things differently. And the reason for doing that is to empower others with that information to go and hopefully make change in their arena. And bringing together more than 40 people in one book to do the same, like I think of the range of topics we've covered, over the last hour or so, has been absolutely mind-blowing. And I think, we can probably sit and talk for another 5 or 6 hours about it, because there is so much. Shameless plug, and not from an egotistical point of view, go out and check out this book, listeners and viewers, because if you work in sport or you work with people, there is something in here that's going to help you. And I think the fascinating thing is that a lot of us don't realize they're myths until someone goes, oh, that's a myth. And actually there's a huge range of topics in there, but I think for people to take something away, certainly from my perspective, having read both the books that you've kindly shared with us, and I guess, would there be one message that you'd want each to leave with our listeners and viewers to take away, to, I guess, mull over and actually challenge themselves?
I mean, I would have said what you said, Kevin, there. I think you summarised brilliantly, and I think probably the only thing I'm compelled to say is, if you are working in the relentless world of sport, you are doing a great job, and we're grateful that you're in there, caring in your role, doing the best that you can do. The purpose of the book isn't to tell you you're wrong across all these facets and areas, but gently exploring some of the reasons why you do something and pausing to think about your role, and diving into one or two of these in this book or the previous one. We just really hope that will help you on your journey.
Yeah. And linking onto that, for me, it's asking yourself, well, why do I do this? So why do I teach this topic? Why is it important? And where has it come from? So the history of the myths was something that I've really enjoyed learning about. Like, I know we're not going to get into another myth, but the history of periodization, which comes from like Eastern Bloc training, like that blew my mind. And it's like we just take this word for granted and we say that we have to periodize and these are the reasons why. But I never knew actually where it originated from. So yeah, understanding where our beliefs come from, I think, is a really important thing.
Well, that's an awesome way, I think, to pull it all together. And by the sounds of it, with the 18 other books that are in the pipeline, I think we're going to have another conversation soon. But I think it's a gift to the sports community, because like you say, that interface between knowledge and factually based knowledge and properly researched and tested with a range of viewpoints, and actually saying, look, this as far as we know, this is how it is, and challenging some of those things that are word of mouth and that kind of whispers down the line approach that sometimes generations have, whether it's in coaching or in other spaces. This book does go a long way to bust some of those. So thank you for sharing it. It's a fascinating read, and I think a lot of people will take a lot away from it, and look forward to speaking to you both again very soon.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
A huge thank you again to our guests Amy and Jen for sharing some time with me today and for the incredible insights shared. You can connect with both of them via the links in the show notes, and please be sure to check out their incredible books. Don't forget to hit subscribe and share this episode with someone you feel would benefit from a little dose of inspiration. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back very soon with another episode of the Rogue Monkey Podcast.